I didn't talk about technology. I didn't talk about the algorithms and the fusion sense of sensors and computer vision and depth sensors and deep learning. All those are great. But true adoption of AI means those technologies should not be the front and center. What should be front and center is the end customer experience. What are they feeling? What are they seeing? How are they achieving what they need to achieve? How are you helping them? AI should be hidden away in the background as helping, enabling, empowering, not trying to claim attention, in my view.
Thank you for joining I Am Possible, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Avishkar Misra, who's the head of data science at Tracfone Wireless Inc., where he's building data science practices to anticipate and address customer needs using artificial intelligence and machine learning. Previously, he was the director of data science practice at Think Big Analytics, and companies such as Oracle, Amazon, Microsoft, CAE Australia. At Amazon, he built artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions for advertising, Amazon Go stores, and movie recommendations. The deep learning based algorithm that he invented for movie recommendation has been described as once in a decade leap in recommendations at Amazon. So Avishkar, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with explaining what data science, AI, and ML is?
Absolutely, and thank you, Eddie, for having me on the show today. So, data science is a very broad term, and it's an evolving term that has been growing, and people have been defining it over the years. I define data science as anything to do with using data and algorithms to solve problems that matter. And the problems could be for the end consumer or the customer. The problems could be for the environment. The problems could be for businesses or logistics. You name it, across the board. And what is really interesting about data science, it's a spectrum of capabilities that go from traditional analytics and BI all the way through to advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning. And it's a blend of that spectrum that is really useful, and every organization defines its own needs within that spectrum. So it's the exciting place to be these days.
Could you kind of like break this up and give some use cases so my audience kind of gets it more easily?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's take a very simple use case around making sure something gets to the customer on time in a particular location. So think about a typical supply chain problem. Now, supply chain forecasting is not new. It's been around for a long time, right? And so people and companies look at their supply chains, look at the product demands and make forecasts and say, okay, we need X quantities of certain product in certain place at certain time. Now, what data science elements there are is, in order to make these kind of predictions, you need data. You need historical data. You need data about the environment, what's happening. Can environmental factors like snow or rain or bad weather disrupt the logistics and supply chains? You also need information about multiple ways that the supply chain can be managed, right? You could have trucks, planes, rails, shipping, and so forth. And so when you're looking at data science holistically, applying these kind of problems, you're looking at bringing those data elements together, looking at the problem, combining it with the domain knowledge and expertise, and solving specific problems that you need.
So Tabby, do we get to a world where we won't be so dependent on data? Because today we are obviously, harvesting a lot of data, and all of these algorithms need a lot of data. Mm-hmm. Do you see these models, algorithm getting less dependent on data? And do you see a world where there could be, because there's a lot of these platforms which are being built, which is low code and no code. So do you think that we are somewhere going over there?
It's a great question, and two parts to it. The first part is no code, low code is definitely the direction to go, and we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. But in terms of data, I think the there is a missed opportunity here in where AI and deep learning algorithms are really focusing. They're focusing on where we've collected huge amounts of data and we're trying to monetize. We generate tons of data anyway, so there's tons to mine. But the analogy I always use is how many examples of a fork and a spoon do you need to learn how to distinguish between the two? Right? And a typical machine learning algorithm that takes huge amounts of data, crunches it down to learn how to distinguish, you need more than two. But as a human or as a child, you can say, hey, this is a fork and this is a spoon, and you know instantly what it means. And I think as the AI space and the ML space starts to incorporate deep learning with symbolic learning, you'll start to get to a place where the reliance on data starts to diminish a little bit. Right? You still need it, and you're still going to generate tons of it. So might as well put it to use.
Right. Fair enough. Would you like to address the low code, no code? Do you see that as the future?
Yes. I think the biggest blocker these days in adoption of AI and machine learning and data science is talent. There is just not enough people out there who understand how to use it. And I'm not just talking about talent in the terms of the Python and R and big data programmers and developers. I'm talking about even business savvy folks who are not understanding the potential of adopting AI and machine learning for their particular business problems. The analogy I like to draw is when the internet was starting, it was just nascent and people were getting to know the internet. And so there were a lot of people saying, it's nice, but I don't need it. I can run my business. It's all fine, right? But if you look at today, there is hardly any business or commerce activity or entertainment activity or business activity that doesn't rely on internet as its major source of sustenance, growth, and so forth. And I believe AI is a bit like that. Everyone across the spectrum need to have sufficient understanding to understand its capabilities, but also its limitations. And so as we are educating the world, that's one part of it, the talent and the skills and bringing that capacity together. There is still a question of talent and skills shortage. And so there's two ways to solve it. We train more people and break through the traditional model of 4 or 5 year degrees that you have graduates coming out of data science and machine learning. By the way, they're fantastic, and there's a lot of universities really pivoted and shifted their curriculum to address that, which is great. But I think that that's just not enough, and we need more and more, more mechanisms to tap into talent beyond the highly focused computer science grads, and that's where low code, no code solutions are going to be super important. These are going to enable and empower people to really use data science and artificial intelligence for the problems that they understand really well, right? So I'm a big analogies guy, so I'll keep referring to new analogies. An analogy here I like to use is like driving a car, right? I don't know about you, Eddie, but I certainly don't know how to put a car together. I don't know how the internals work. If it breaks down, I have to go tap my mechanic, but I can still drive a car to get from A to B. I can still use it to run my errands and go places. And I think this is where we would like AI to get to, where you don't have to know the internals of the AI and machine learning system in order to use it effectively, yet also safely and with the ethical use and making sure you do the right thing. Just like how you drive a car. You don't go off crashing into things and you follow the rules of the road and so forth.
I guess that's the only way to get more and more people to understand and kind of tinker around with this technology, because this tool is really becoming potential. But like you mentioned, enterprise is still not like really understanding the use case, and there's a need to kind of educate and make them understand that these are the use cases which you can leverage right now, as well as push the student, the entrepreneur community to kind of, say that, okay, here is this, like a low code, no code tool where you can kind of tinker around, and then maybe you want to build in some advanced tools into AIs, then maybe you kind of, get into some advanced learning and stuff like that. So yes, it's in a very exciting space. Since we're talking about the low code, no code space, what are your views on GPT-3? And while you're addressing GPT-3, maybe you could also touch upon the news which is going on at this point in time. The OpenAI chief scientist officer saying that the neural network and NLPs are slightly becoming conscious, and Joshua Bach also says the same thing about these large neural networks. So would you like to address that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think firstly around GPT itself, I think GPT, just like other deep neural networks, are a progressive step towards learning more and developing a better understanding of the space, right? Whether it's GPT-3, I'm sure there'll be other versions that we enhance and build. The question is, how effective are they in serving our particular needs? What I'm sort of conscious about is there's a real expectation that AI systems are going to turn into the general AI system, AGI systems that, you're talking about, remember Data from Star Trek, that's, those kind of AI systems were really self-aware and conscious. I think we're a little far away from it right now. I think we're still going to take some time. AI is really good at a narrow slither of activities typically, and really determined by data and the volume of data that you fed into the system. Like if you look at the amount of data GPT-3 and other deep learning neural networks, they take in to produce something, it's phenomenal. But now compare that to the learning experience of a child. How quickly can a child pick something up and learn and adopt it, just with a few examples? And I think until we get to that type of learning, where it's didactic and interactive and the systems can learn from this conversation sort of style, which we used to do back in the 70s and 80s. There's a trend of AI research which is around expert systems and conversational and knowledge acquisition and so forth. And it was deemed really cumbersome and hard to maintain. But there's a blending, I think the two needs to happen before we get to that singularity awareness, sort of consciousness evolving. Should we get there? Yes, we should definitely try and get there. But by the way, in the meanwhile, there's tons of things that are happening right now. And believe it or not, there's tons, everyday interaction that you and I have is driven by AI systems. Whether you are shopping, whether you're searching, whether you're doing, you're routing a plan to go from A to B, with the movies you want to watch, the shows you want to watch, all of them are driven by AI algorithms. And so now the question is, how do we make this kind of capability accessible to the widest, broadest set of people out there? So we truly democratize the use of AI, right? We truly democratize the adoption of it. So it's not just narrowly focused in, a few organizations and companies.
I think that's such an important point, because I guess amongst the AI researchers, we have this moonshot that, okay, let's go for that faraway target of AGI. But then you rightfully pointed out there is so much of what AI can do currently, and the biggest thing is, how do we democratize AI? So you've been part of some of the top companies, and you've played a role, bringing the Amazon Go to store to life, and also the Amazon recommendation engine. So maybe talk about your works, that you have built over there.
The three things that I think are really important to driving adoption of AI really have nothing to do with technology or data. And I call them the 3 E's, right? The first one is empathy. Can you empathize with the stakeholder or the customer or the user of the solution or the problem that you need to address, right? Can you really understand what they need, not just what you think you need, right? So can you empathize with the person, their problems, to design the right solution and determine whether an AI even has a role to play? It may not, right? The second is, how do you facilitate experimentation? Right? Because AI research and development is a highly risky endeavor. Data science is really risky, and it very much is a research endeavor. And the question is, how do you minimize the risk of this? And the best way to minimize the risk that I've discovered so far across different organizations is to scale the number of experiments you can do. right? So instead of just trying one thing at a time, you try and do 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 things as quickly as possible to maximize your learnings. Because the quicker you can learn, the quicker you can decide whether this is the right thing to do or not, change directions or stop. And believe it or not, like you can do this by either scaling the number of experiments you do in parallel, like multiple projects and teams and so forth, which is what a lot of the organizations like Amazon typically love to do, but also shortening the experimentation cycle, right? So instead of waiting for 1 year, how can you maximize the learnings in the short term? So speeding up the experimentation cycle is very, very important. And the final is empower. How do you empower everyone, whether it's an organization, whether it's in the society, to take on and solve these problems where they see it? Are they going to get caught up in bureaucracy or permissions and rules and waiting for someone to say, oh, yes, now you can do it? Or do they have the freedom, right? Google famously has a 20% time, which I love as a philosophy and a concept, right? Because you're empowering the employees in an organization to find out places where they know where the problems are. They know what they need to solve, right? So it's very, very smart for organizations to empower the people to empathize with their customers, whether they're internal or external, scale up the experimentation cycles so they can learn as quickly as you can, and then empower, not just from technology, skills, and talent, but also time and resources.
Right, yeah. So you've got a complete different outlook when it comes to AI and ML. Would you like to, talk about Amazon Go, and talk about, from the idea to implementation process and what's been the learnings from there?
Yeah, no, Amazon Go is a fantastic concept and it really, really pushed the needle ahead of its time. So I remember it was a project internally within Amazon, which is pretty hush-hush project. And when I joined the team, and I didn't know what I was joining at that time. And when I came in and told me about this concept, and I'm going to say, you're going to do what? So it was the state of art in AI and machine learning and computer vision wasn't very, very advanced. And so this was pushing and taking those things at the edges and bringing them into a product, right? This is moving from a lab into a product. And what I loved about it and learned the most was realizing that the flow-on effects of AI are deeper than the first iteration, first level. And you really need to think through what are the possible benefits or even the risk by looking at the consequences further on. Like if you look at the first pass of it, from a typical person looking at Amazon Go would say, hey, Amazon Go, it's a retail experience. You walk in, you pick up an item, you walk out. You don't need a cashier person at the checkout scanning your items. You're trying to get rid of those jobs, right? That's the first gut reaction, right? You're automating and you're getting rid of people. Now, let's look at the problem really from a customer perspective, right? You're shopping for things. You've packed up your cart or basket, and then you come around and line up at the checkout, and there's a long line of people, and you're waiting and waiting, and the poor checkout person is feverishly trying to scan the items and package and bag them, and all the time trying to make small talk and say, hey Eddie, how'd you go? Did you find milk? Did you find eggs that you wanted to pick up? And at that time, are you really going to say, no, I forgot the milk. Hold on, let me go get it. Right, and so you're not going to do that. So you've definitely not going to be and create more tension and stress for the people lining up as well. There have been situations where people say, oh man, this is taking too long. I'm going to walk out. I'll come back and shop again. And so that's a loss of sales for the business, but also it's unfair pressure on the checkout person. Now, if we remove the barrier for checkout, and instead now the checkout person, the cashier, the employee is now in the aisles. Now they can actually interact with the customer. Now they can actually build rapport and relationship. Now they can actually help them where they need it, right? And so that's one simple benefit for the customer. Now take another example of it. If I'm able to track what you are buying as you're shopping in there as an algorithm. So suppose you're walking down one aisle, you pick up a jar of pasta sauce and some spaghetti. Imagine if you got a notification on your phone and say, hey Eddie, looks like you're making pasta tonight. There's a really good bottle of red wine in aisle 5 that's on special. Would you like me to show you how to get there? Right? And so what you've done is you've enriched the experience for the customer. And so if you think about what these two examples highlighted is the focus on the end customer experience. I didn't talk about technology. I didn't talk about the algorithms and the fusion of sensors and computer vision and depth sensors and deep learning. All those are great. But true adoption of AI means those technologies should not be the front and center. What should be front and center is the end customer experience. What are they feeling? What are they seeing? How are they achieving what they need to achieve? How are you helping them? AI should be hidden away in the background as helping, enabling, empowering, not trying to claim attention, in my view.
Right. I completely buy that point that I guess we have got into a world where everybody is going bonkers about technology and its capabilities and what it's doing to mankind and what it can do to mankind. And maybe we, in that process, we are not looking at the end customer experience. Maybe the analogy would be like, the mobile phones. Today we have a computer in a pocket, but nobody thinks about it like that. Because it's called ubiquitous. But I think it's nice to kind of also inform and make people aware about this Amazon Go store is such a brilliant idea. I think it's all like a game changer, leveraging all of these technologies, upending a customer experience. But maybe we should also possibly talk about the automation part, though in a small way, and also the tracking part, though in a small way, which in the next couple of decades could really grow, because we're getting into the world where IoT is gonna kind of sensorize every physical objects, giving us data and making us build better business on that. We're getting into a world where we are breaking away from a 2D platform and getting into the spatial web or Web 3.0 or the metaverse. So, and we'll have glasses like this, maybe which could have inside outside tracking. Would you like to kind of talk about this automation and tracking, which is right now maybe just rearing its head up? But what would this look like in a world where everything is being sensorized and the Web 3.0 or the metaverse? Do you kind of think about that?
No, it's a great question. I mean, if you think about where the trajectory is heading, right? And so there are two schools of thoughts here, right? There's one school of thought is this is all very positive. It's going to have a great effect. And the other school of thought is, oh my God, I'm going to get bombarded with advertising as I walk down everywhere, right? It's the more negative one. It's the dystopian future that some of the recent sci-fi fiction movies tend to sort of gravitate towards. I think the reality of the future would be somewhere in the middle, right? I think if we focus on the value and the end customer experience, and the value not just for the person in terms of monetary sense, but in terms of their well-being, their happiness, their contentment, the environment, the social equality elements of it, then that allows us to ask the right questions of how we deploy and use AI technologies. And this is why it's really important for us to train and teach everybody about monitoring for bias, or making sure we're not discriminating in the systems through data, and creating a social divide more and more, right? I think there's definitely a lot of value that all of these can be combined into offering, right? So I'm very excited about the potential of the future, because right now we're at a cusp where cloud computing, deep learning algorithms, large volumes of data, IoT sensors, backed with 5G connectivity, with a high speed, high throughput, low latency connectivity, is going to feed each other. They're going to feed into each other. and they're going to enable more and more capabilities that create richer experiences for customers, that unlock new capabilities that I've never even imagined. But more importantly, it creates new business opportunities. New organizations will pop up, new startups, new companies looking at how do you take this further. Like one of my favorite idea that I heard about the Indian government was doing was around Kisan drone system. I thought that's a brilliant idea, right? You look combining the IoT, drones, 5G, AI, and ML capabilities. Now, how do you design this so that a farmer in rural India can take advantage of this program without necessarily going to computer science school and degrees and getting a PhD in how to code deep learning algorithms? I think there's new businesses that are going to prop up there that are going to go there. The one thing you said about the world of metaverse, which I think is very, very promising, and the virtual reality or augmented reality, extended reality concept. And we've got big companies throwing their weight behind it, like Meta and others. I think there's a lot of potential. My only caveat is a lot of the work in metaverse right now is focused on entertainment, right? Gaming, attending virtual concerts and so forth. And they've been around for a while, right? Take Fortnite, before that, take Minecraft, take Second Life and so forth. All these metaverses, virtual spaces have been around. But what's, I think, really going to turbocharge that is if we tackle two things. The first is, can people learn there? Can people grow? How can universities and colleges tap into the metaverse to educate and reach out and make training or education more fun and more visual or interactive, right? And then the second is, can they earn, right? If you can't make money out of it, then you've eliminated a lot of the people from actually wanting to spend time. Bulk of a time on a day is spent on some time or some type of activity like work or your own business and so forth. And so if the metaverse that we're designing and developing collectively doesn't cater for the mind to learn and the mind to earn, then the adoption is going to be limited.
Right. I think you hit bullseye. I think, yes, we need to think differently. We need to keep that as the ethos, that the platform should be a place where you can learn, grow, educate, and earn also. I think there is so many actually business opportunities. And I guess if we need to look beyond, and I guess then we'll have great business opportunities. You have been part of the Amazon recommendation engine. Would you like to talk about that and also share your current research or works that you're building?
That was a really fun and exciting project, and I got to learn phenomenally from my peers and my team when I joined that particular team. But it was a really good example of taking deep learning with a grain of salt and not just following just because what everybody is doing. So let me give you a bit of context, right? So typically in movie recommendations, the problem is formulated as one of three particular ways, right? Two are the most dominant ones. One is around just simply content-based recommendation. You like comedy movies, we're going to recommend you comedy movies, right? You like action movies, we're going to recommend action movies, right? So what is the content of this movie and what is Eddie's preferences and taste? The other one is more like collaborative filtering, where you look at, take all the people who are watching movies in the past, have watched movies in the past, and what was similar and different about their watch patterns, and identify and recommend movies. And this is nothing new. This has been around for a long time, and that's the typical formulation that drives tons of recommendation algorithms, whether it's Amazon, whether it's online shopping, and everywhere. When the team decided, hey, look, let's look at deep learning, and we've been looking at it different ways, and the team was looking at it and trying to formulate it in the same traditional collaborative filtering sort of mechanism. And what they found was we're still getting similar results, if not worse results, using deep learning with compared to traditional algorithms. And they were all scratching our heads. And so I said, look, I was relatively new to the team. And I said, look, why don't we just simply predict what's next, right? Why don't we just simply say, instead of trying to do collaborative filtering, we'll say, what have you watched? And what do you think we're going to watch in next week? And it was a very, very silly, simple idea from a novice, but it turned out to be really effective. In fact, that was the algorithm which gave us a really fantastic lift in performance in terms of accurate prediction. So what we notice is what's really important is you don't simply blindly adopt just because one particular way is a fashion into new technologies. You really have to look at the problem and solve backwards for it. And it's really important to get the eyes of a non-expert or a novice to look at the problem, because they'll come up with solutions that you may not have considered because, that's just too silly, right? And so one of the things I've learned from that experience, which I love to do, is always make sure my team has a blended set of people, not just the really smart, technically savvy data science and data engineers, but also business folks, and also try and diversify the lessons and input from a variety of folks.
Right. Yeah, it's so very important to look at a problem with through a diverse set of people, because sometimes, like you mentioned, answers are there where you're least looking to kind of find. So this AI, you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation that the journey from a lab to a product is kind of still difficult here. So would you kind of, advise on how businesses, entrepreneurs can kind of accelerate this journey for taking, from the lab to real world implementations of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, not many organizations in the world are able to monetize AI as they aspire to, right? And biggest challenge for this is not just the talent and people, which is every organization CIO is sort of talking about the big problem there around having the right people with the talent and skill to do it. But it's also around productionization. Going from the lab to productization is the big gap. Like a few years ago, we did a survey and we found that less than, on average, most organizations take 6 to 12 months to deploy an algorithm which is ready into production, right? But compare that to the algorithm or the deployment environments and solutions that exist in Amazon and Google's and Microsoft's of the world. They do it in a matter of hours and days. And so biggest bottleneck for people, the companies that are not necessarily at the leading and cutting edge of AI ML research, is how do we shorten the deployment experimentation time, right? How do you go from an idea into an online experiment or a test and validation so that you build the confidence and gather the data and before you move forward? A lot of the time, the folks who are worried about, and rightly so, they're worried about what is the implications of AI algorithms on the business and the customer experience and so forth. We're all speculating, we don't know. So how do you address that sort of a dearth of knowledge? Well, you just run an experiment. You try a small group and you learn from it. And there you might learn that the algorithm is terrible or it's not behaving as expected, and you go back to the drawing board. Or you say, yeah, it's good, and we can move forward. So I would strongly advise organizations, if you can, shorten your experimentation and deployment cycle. Try to unify that platform in such a way that you go from an idea, once you've got an idea, you can build a prototype, you can test it quickly and get it deployed into production. And if you can do that, then you can learn faster. Then you can start seeing the value faster. Then you can start demonstrating the impact. And that builds consensus, that builds support within the organization or beyond.
Right. Would you like to talk about the cutting edge of AI innovation that's kind of caught your attention at this point in time?
Yeah, look, I'm a huge fan of going the unexpected route in the world of AI, right? So right now, in the last decade, we've seen a huge focus and attention in deep learning, which is phenomenal, right? It is fantastic the amount of progress we've made in terms of computer vision, in terms of natural language understanding, in terms of conversations, but I think we still can go further. And what I'm really interested in to see is more around merging of deep learning neural nets and AI with traditional symbolic learning and deduction, right? So can we operate on logical consequences? So right now, some of the AI systems are really good at determining and detecting stop signs in people. But if something is just amiss, then the result is completely different, right? And so we might want to think about how do we combine the low-level signal to symbols, right? So you get a symbol of a person, from the image or the video into a person or a street sign and so forth. And then high-level reasoning on top of those symbols to say, yeah, your street signs are on the side, but sometimes they can be in someone's hand if they're holding the sign up, right? And that kind of that reasoning and AI blending, that's the exciting thing that is really going to get us closer and closer to the general AGI sort of space.
We addressed this in the middle of the conversation, but I thought maybe we can bring this up because it's something which, I mean, when we talk about AI, ML, everybody talks about it, the existential risk. Today, we gather somewhere around every single day, we gather around 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. As a data scientist, how careful are you with the data privacy? Because we getting into a world which is getting more and more digitized. So maybe you could address that, and also maybe we missed about the automation and the tracking part in the world. Maybe in the next couple of decades, maybe we talk about that also. Is that something which worries you?
Yes, it does, right? The data privacy, data security, and protecting the customer's privacy is very, very important. Look, at the end of the day, it comes down to level of trust. And if as an organization, as a product or service provider, you don't have the trust of the person who is supporting, they're going to take their dollars and go somewhere else, or they're going to take their data and go somewhere else. That's also the next future, right? And so for organizations that are there to serve the customer and offer them something and help them, it's a really bad thing to do not to be careful or to be cavalier about the data or the implications of using the data without the consent of the person, right? And so I think it's good that we have a greater awareness now around what is being collected and new legislations that are being formulated around giving more control and striking the right balance between individuals' rights around data. I think collecting the data across multiple sources and combining them, look, at the end of it has to come down to how are we empowering the people to make choices, right? So if I'm offering something of benefit for you out of the algorithms, if you submit your data to those algorithms and you're getting something valuable out of it, you'll be more likely to share it, right? But if you're not getting anything out of it and you see there's no value to it, then there's nothing in it for you, right? And so I think organizations are starting to strike the right balance there a little bit on giving more, empowering individuals with more control over what their data is and what they can and cannot do. Personally, I've always been very, very focused on making sure my team really handles data with care. So we tend to eliminate all PII data when we work with any customer data. We try and minimize the number of people who have access to it and only do it on a sort of a per query basis. Bulk of our analysis tends to be privacy protecting analysis. So we don't really care about the person and the identity. We care about how do we help them through other attributes like their usage, their patterns and behaviors and so forth. Now, the other side of it you talked about was the tracking, right? You're walking down the street and being tracked. It's an interesting problem because it will come down to the kind of society and that we live in. And different countries and different societies will have different preferences of where they go. You'll have much more aggressive governments and institutions that are much more aggressive in invading people's privacies. And then you'll have more liberal governments and societies where they will offer it as an opportunity for people to opt out or benefit from, but not necessarily invade them. And it is a concern because it becomes how easy it is to capture and collect that data and maintain that data. But it'll come down to people. People will have to either opt out or find ways. Like there was with the face recognition algorithms that people have been developing on the street, you have other people coming up with ways to break those algorithms so you can't recognize them, right? Wearing masks or even certain colors that will confuse the deep learning algorithm. So it's going to be an interesting next decade or so.
Yeah, interesting next decade. I'm really excited for this convergence of technologies, because earlier it used to be one single technology, but now today, if you go to see, everything is converging, and when it converges, it's adding real world values, and we'll start seeing those benefits. And technology, I think, for always has been something which has kind of like help in the evolution of mankind. It's humans who choose to kind of use technology for their own purpose or own ways. I think it is where we kind of take technology towards, whether good or the bad. So the technology inherently is not good or bad. It's always the humans. So I'm super excited for the future of technology and where this is going. So you have also been vested in precision agriculture and personalized healthcare, IoT. Would you like to talk about that? And because this is about the democratization of AI. That's the only way I think we could get there. So maybe address the works that you've been doing in precision agriculture and personalized healthcare.
No, absolutely. And so I've been very fortunate to have the experience of working across multiple domains, right? So I started my career in medical research. Can I get AI algorithms to detect and segment CT scans so we can help radiologists diagnose faster and quicker and scale the capacity of radiologists? Worked with flight simulation systems where you can do war game simulations with virtual entities and train pilots in how to fly and avoid and do the right thing, right? In simulators, right? And then across the board, when you talk about different domains that we worked in looking at big data analytics and DNA sequence analysis to figure out the right crops that are more resistant to certain types of diseases. Look, there's phenomenal amount of effort and there's so many great ideas out there. Like that is the fantastic thing out there, right? They've got everybody who has a particular mind, creative and curious mind, who can bring these together. One of the favorite things I'm really excited about and alluded to was around precision agriculture. How can you take drones combined with cameras, combined with IoT sensors, can you combine it with 5G connectivity to now help the farmers? Help the crop yield, right? And you now enable the type of visibility tracking and that it wasn't really possible 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, right? We worked at when I was at Oracle, we worked on an interesting project where we worked with a farm agriculture producer who was looking at using aerial imagery to understand the health of an individual tree in an orchard. So you have a plane that flies over, takes a photo of the entire orchard, and then you can look by aligning the grids of it and knowing the geospatial location, you can look at the health of an individual tree, which tree in the orchard needs more water, needs more nutrients, which needs more care. So you can optimize the yields that you get out of it. Now, at the end of the day, that technology would empower farmers by scaling it up. Now the challenge we were dealing with was, how do you scale this kind of analysis? And so this is where cloud computation is fantastic, right? You can now spin up a cluster of machines, churn through 100,000 acres of images very, very rapidly, not having to worry about, oh, it's going to take us weeks to analyze it. It's a matter of hours, if not minutes, to analyze that. Get that insight to the farmer, and so that they can go and take care of the crops and the orchard and so forth. Now, personally, I would love to see that democratized and available across the globe, countries like India and Africa, Asian countries, because those farmers really are at a cusp where they can do more with their crops, right, with their fields. And that means democratizing it. And democratization starts with lowering the cost of ownership and cost of using these services. And so that's where I'm really optimistic about where we're heading.
I see that most of our brilliant minds moving abroad. How do we kind of reverse this trend? Would you have some kind of an insight or advice to the government? And could you also share maybe advice, if I may say, to the government on what can we do to create a nation that really looks up to and is investing, supporting, nurturing the technology, deep tech space here in India?
Yeah, wow, that's a big topic to cover. Look, I will say what I've seen so far, and some of the work coming out of the Indian government has been phenomenal in terms of the policies. They're really looking at forward-looking sort of investments, right? One of the biggest things I love was the apprentice programs, the NATS program, where they're a national apprentice traineeship program, I believe, where they're looking at connecting people with apprenticeships in technology fields in AI and data science spaces. And so now you're going beyond the really amazing colleges and universities and tapping into a wider pool of people. When you tap into a wider pool of people and give them the skills, by the way, people are very creative and innovative. Like, they have this, India has this concept of word called jugaad, which I love. It's a great phrase. Some people take it negatively. I love it. I think it's a very, very positive term, because it means it's a mindset of a problem solver. A mindset of someone who's creative, who can put things together and look at the unexpected combinations to get things to make progress. And so I love that by empowering more people with the skills and knowledge and talent, you give them opportunities to tap into their own minds and creativity, right? So if you want to lift, we've got to invest more. But I also I would love to see more in the early education programs, right? So India has a population that's really prizes education, knowledge, typically more than other countries do. I'll be, frank, born in India, grew up in Australia, lived in States. So I've seen at least 3 societies and cultures and their interesting patterns across the board. And one of the things that where I think India should invest a lot more is around bridging the gap between the rural and the city urbans in terms of when early childhood education is concerned. So how do we empower the kids in the rural area to have access to similar kind of training, mentorship, coaching across the board? Because there's tons of talent there, tons of bright minds. And if we tap into them early, then we feed the pipeline that they're going to do amazing things.
I think that's such you put it so beautifully, because I was just having a conversation this week with Dr. Nana Saheb Thorat. He is leading the cancer nano-vaccine research, is a Marie Curie fellow. He's from Maharashtra. He studied in a municipal school. and then his journey has been from a municipal school to Oxford, and he's doing some fantastic groundbreaking work in nanotechnology, nanobiotech. And I believe that we need to support the rural community, because I guess most of the funding from the government also goes to the IITs, and there are a lot of these small universities which is completely overlooked, and where I believe there is really that jugaad or goes on over there, where they don't have resources but they have great talent and great mind, and they're leveraging all that opportunity. And I really hope and I wish that the government creates an ecosystem which bridges that gap, where we get equal opportunity, no matter if you're sitting in an urban area or rural area. And I think that would completely accelerate innovation and entrepreneurship here in India.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just on that point, right? That part where this is where 5G connectivity, this is where metaverse, this is where VR, AR can bridge that gap, right? You don't have to go build physical schools if everybody can attend the virtual school with all the virtual spaces, right? And so that's faster democratization and access, and then you'll see amazing things come out of it.
Right, yeah, exactly, completely. You got bullseye. So, for my listeners, would you like to kind of share your advice on what books or content or courses that they can look into, the ones who are interested in the space, and who do you look up to?
Yeah, wow. There's so many amazing minds that they keep coming up and learning along the way. I mean, you've got the usual Andrew Ang, Jan LeCun and Jeffrey Hinton and Fei Li. They're amazing minds in the world of deep learning and AI and what they're doing and taking forward. I'm also a fan of Tom Mitchell, who wrote the book on machine learning that I use in my university back in Australia. And he's got a really sort of broader perspective on and I found that really interesting. So for those who are interested in learning about machine learning, this is the space to go. More recently, though, I've been looking more on people, organizations, and how do you get the best out of it, right? And so I'm gonna recommend one book called The Innovation Stack. It's by Jim McClevey, I believe is the name, right? He's the creator of Square, who talked about how innovation happens in sequences and things, that when you keep adding innovation on top of it, you get a really competitive business that survives even Amazon, the big giant gorilla, going after that payment space. So it's a really good book. It's a very nice read. It's got nice stories. Another one I'm a big fan of is Humanocracy by Gary Hamel. I don't know if you've heard of Gary Hamel, but he's really amazing about perspective about eliminating bureaucracy so you can tap into the real talent of people. How do you empower people? How do you get them to think broader and give them the capacity? Because these two things are going to be super important for anyone looking to tap into and make AI real. Right? And if this is why it's so important for us to go beyond just the tech, understand the mind, understand the society, understand the broader space.
Yeah, the world is going in such a fantastic direction, and if we all kind of come together, we can build tech which can create true evolution of mankind. And I'm super excited for the space, and that's the reason I do this podcast, and it's my humble way to kind of raise awareness and bring education, educate people on the cutting edge of technologies and how they can leverage it and benefit, and make their life better. So thank you. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. My last question, as somebody who's been in the space for the longest time, who's a pioneer, in the space, if you had to paint a picture of what the world is going to look like in the next 10 years, what would you have to say?
Wow, you're asking me to look into my own prediction algorithm and make a prediction. It's it's going to be a very similar but also different space, because if you look back at the last 10 years and where we are now, things have changed dramatically, and this rate of change is accelerating. What we humans are really poor at is understanding what does exponential growth means, exponential change means, right? We're very good at linear. And so for a long time, the curve of the exponential growth is well below the linear curve, right? And at some point, there's a point of inflection and things dramatically change. And so, like, I'm very, very hopeful and positive about the world of AI and data science, provided we can address the talent gap, provided we can democratize it, provided we can empower the people to solve these problems themselves. I think there's phenomenal potential to bring in some of the traditional, lesser focused algorithms and techniques in symbolic learning and reasoning and logic, combine that with some of the state-of-the-art and deep learning, and that's where we start to see big gains when it comes towards more smarter AI systems. I think anyone's got an idea out there, and who can help me figure out a better way to predict the future, I'm all ears.
Avishkar, thank you. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you the very best, and I'm sure you're going to be playing a huge role in shaping the future of us, by what you're building. So really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. To my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Avishkar.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, everyone.